Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Legally, where the legal meets the cultural. So excited to have you join us. Thank you for tuning in each and every week, for sharing it out, sharing it with a friend, letting us know that the information has been helpful to you, and that we are really meshing the cultural and the legal so you can understand what's going on out here and be equipped to be able to talk about it and also know what to do to advocate on our behalf. So let's bring in our co-hosts for the show, Edward Pichardo, Esquire, and Royce Russell, Esquire, so they can greet you before we get started. So what's going on, Ed? You're back in the United States of America, which is a good thing.
Oh, yes. Welcome to everyone to Speaking Legally. Once again, my name is Ed Pichardo. Thank you for being an audience today and listening to us today and receiving the information. Welcome.
And Mr. Royce Russell, Esquire.
Once again, always welcome to have our faithful listeners come on board and viewers to watch us do our thing as we try to untangle some of the issues, or at least address or inform some of our viewers of the issues that affect our culture. And on the last episode, Ed had talked about two cases where people from our culture are going to be incarcerated for a lengthy period of time over what I'm going to call BS, and you can fill it in any way you want to. But it is just an example of how laws are not working in our favor. And we're going to tail off on that to discuss what parole is based upon these gentlemen's situation. But I know you wanted to start off with what was relevant in the news, Dr. Grant. So why don't you hit us off so we can make sure we stay relevant?
Well, just a few things, but there's so many things going on. But what do you all have to say about the postmaster pausing on whatever implementation he was going to do to avoid any, accusations of improprieties prior to the election?
Well, he knows his address is listed, so he don't want to be the object of anyone's affection or dissatisfaction, as we call it. I mean, the man in the Oval Office, he has security, CIA, and a whole bunch of other things. The postal inspector may not, and maybe the politics are bleeding through, or rational thinking is bleeding through, despite some of the orders that he's receiving from his chief in command.
Well, from what I understand, he was recently appointed to the position, even though I believe he had some actual possible conflicts of interest in that he has some contracts that have something to do already with, the transportation of materials, delivery, services that are otherwise contracted by the Postal Service. But nonetheless, the whole idea of the defunding the post office, and from what some people theorize, in an effort to suppress mail-in ballots and the counting of mail-in ballots, it's disturbing. I mean, you grow up being taught that you live in a democracy, the strongest and freest democracy on the planet, and now we're being told that the president of the United States has appointed a postal inspector whose mission is to defund, dismantle, and otherwise lead to dysfunction the United States Postal Service. And I've heard that sorting machines are being removed or otherwise being turned off. Postal boxes, mailboxes are being removed from certain neighborhoods. I mean, it's all, kind of shocking. It's because of COVID, a number of people are concerned about actually going to polling places, and we're planning on sending in their ballots by mail. I mean, I'm telling everybody I know, you know what? Just go to that polling place, put on your mask, stand out there like you did for Obama and vote, because this is, I think, one of the most monumental, if not the most monumental election in our lives, given the stakes that are, involved and how high they are. Because I'm afraid that if election night comes and Trump is up, because those who went to the polling place put him there at those numbers, and we're waiting for the ballots to be counted that he may decide, you know what, we're not going to count those ballots, and he's otherwise going to have some reason to say, oh, well, this is the reason why I'm going to remain in office despite whatever counting is going on. Because as you saw in some of these local elections, some incumbents were up on election night, and then when the ballots, the mail-in ballots and the absentee ballots came in, the count changed. And so I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen here.
Well, one of the things that I think when you look at the social economics and you look at the culturalism is that we've always been in a position as far as preaching to our communities that you need to go out, you need to vote, you need to vote, you need to go out and vote. So I think the ideology and the mindset of that I'm going to write this in is not embedded in our culture, because we know that we've been hoodwinked and bamboozled before. And I hope, and it's my impression, that Corona will not stop that process. Now, where it gets a little lukewarm in my brain, and we'll have to see whether or not fiction turns into fact, is when you start climbing up the social economic ladder of people of color who feel like, you know what, I don't need to go out. I'll just put this in my mailbox right here because West Orange or Mount Vernon or New Rochelle or White Plains, they haven't really removed any postal services here and everything is all right, not really understanding what happens behind the scenes. So I think we need to stay on course as we always been. Don't let up. Don't look to the left. Don't look to the right. You know, go straight on, which is go to the polling booths. And believe me, a lot of people are going a lot of places other than the polling booths. They're going to the bodegas. They're going shopping. They're going to the malls. They're going to, you know, now they soon they'll be going to court. So by the time November comes, you just strap up and go in there and place that vote.
So Richard, hey Richard, thank you for tuning in as always. He said, what about the Russian cronies? Do we need to worry about that this time around?
Well, I mean, you have, go ahead. Well, I think it's part of a general pattern of a lot of disinformation. I mean, it happened the last campaign. Recently, they were talking not just about the Russians, they were talking about the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians. I mean, you know, a lot of different foreign actors have their particular favorites here. They're saying that the Russians are favoring Trump. They're saying that the Chinese are favoring possibly Biden and the Iranians as well. I mean, you know, the bottom line is people need to inform themselves. The other day, I got a text message from someone, you know, kind of conserving this whole vaccine thing and that saying that Bill Gates and Dr. Fauci were roommates in college, when in fact they didn't even go to the same school. And I think there's a 10 or 15-year age difference between it, which would have made it impossible. But, you know, people, what happens is they read something on the internet, and because it's in writing and it's on the internet, people take it as gospel instead of doing their research. Do your research. There's information out there, lots of it. Just start using your hands and the keyboard and get busy. Don't just get something and run away with it. If somebody sends you something, check it. Make sure it's accurate. You don't have to just receive the information and say, oh, okay, well, I guess this is, you know, and the reason is because, you know,
you're beating the drum that's been beat a long, long time. It's been beat before you came. It was beat before you came, before you came. It was beat before you came, before you came. I mean, it's just been beat all day and all night. People like drama. People like quick fixes. They like quick sound bites. And so they run with it. You know, what I would like to proffer is you plan your work and you work your plan. Everything else is noise. Plan your work and work your plan. Who cares if the Russians are doing this or the Albanians are doing this or the Asians are doing that or the Africans are doing. You know, you got to get up in the morning and you know you got to pay bills, right? So you're going to get up in the morning, you're going to go pay bills. That's what you're going to do. You know the elevator's broken, you're going to take the stairs because you got to pay bills. That's what you're going to do. You know, if the car's not working, you're going to get a ride to the train station and take care of your business. So all the background and the outside noise Leave it where it's supposed to be. It's just supposed to be noise. As a matter of fact, on CNN, Anderson Cooper, while I was doing work yesterday, had this guy who's supposed to be a consultant to Trump administration about the vaccine, and he had no facts or figures or whatsoever, no focus groups, no testing whatsoever as to why you should take a certain drug. Now, on the face, he was an idiot. On the face, you shouldn't listen to him. But Anderson Cooper stayed on for at least, if not an hour, 45 minutes, just bantering back and forth, telling him, "Oh, you've been cited by the Better Business Bureau. Aren't you cronies with Trump?" He just back and forth, back and forth. If the person doesn't know what they're talking about, move on. If you think that we don't know what we're talking about, please move on. But I guarantee that we know what we're talking about. So let's get to talking what we're about, because we can spend all day on that joke.
Well, we just want to make sure that we're clear to everybody. We understand the Rona is still roaming. COVID-19 has not gone away. So as we've said, just be careful and prepared to go out and vote so that we don't deal with all of this. He's just setting it up. Those of us who can see, right? He's just setting up the playbook for what will happen on election night. So we have to be smarter. We have to be 2 steps ahead. We have to help the elderly in our community to safely get to and from the polls, put on their masks, wear gloves if they need to, have the sanitizers. Like, let's be prepared so that we're not in that situation come election night. Like, that's not where we want to be at all. So
look, if you could go to the supermarket, which everybody's going to the supermarket, that's it. It's just a trip to the supermarket. That's how you have to view it. You just got to view it as that. It's a special day to the supermarket, because I see a lot of people in supermarkets.
Yeah, people are moving about. So one other thing before we jump into our legal topics for today, this is some more of the cultural, and that's affecting all of us. We see that now the numbers are going up at colleges and universities. Let's not just talk about school, but the federal government is not tracking all these cases that are happening at our colleges and universities. Co-host, what do you say about this?
Well, I can tell you, prime example, University of North Carolina, classes open up from school with less than a week, I think 4 days of classes, 162 cases just off the bat. Boom. Now they're going virtual. That tells you something, right? We have to understand that education is a business too. And there are institutions out there that need or want or feel the need that they want that income coming in. And any shortage of that, they be damned. And so now you had in-person classes, and now you got another 162 cases, and they ran out.
It's up to 200.
Now it's up to 200, right? They ran out of places and spaces to quarantine these students. Uncalled for, unnecessary, but as they say, dollar bill, y'all. Money rules, and that's what we're seeing. And hopefully somebody will put a stop to it, or collectively we'll put a stop to it. So
it's amazing that you say that. I have a close friend whose son was getting ready to go to college somewhere, I believe in Virginia or West Virginia, and she kind of suspected that possibly they were opening up for in class with the idea maybe of later on going virtual, but at the very least collecting the tuition money first before going ahead and saying, oh, virtual, because some parents were like, why am I paying for virtual, when and I don't think many of these schools said, well, we're going to offer some sort of tuition reduction, or these are the special features of our virtual format. That's not what you have. So I did see something refreshing the other day, though, where I think some of the football conferences were going to continue the athletes on scholarship, despite the fact that they were not going to have an actual season. So I don't know. I mean, it's just all really disturbing. I hope, these collegiate institutions get it together and either, just do what they need to do to prepare to make sure that those campuses safe. But when it comes to young people, it's just so difficult. I mean,
and you know what? And I'll add a critical eye to that, because I don't think everything is all altruistic, right? If you don't give these kids these scholarships, guess what? They're going to transfer next year. You know that. I know that. You know that you are on ESPN. You know that at some point there's going to be a cease to the coronavirus. You let 3 linemen, 4 tackles, your starting quarterback from Alabama decide that they want to go to Kentucky or they want to go to another school, and Nick Saban flip his wig. You understand what I mean? And he's the coach of Alabama. These coaches, their livelihood is dependent on these young kids coming in and doing well and having those TV contracts and those apparel deals. The salary for coaching is a baseline, nominal nuisance fee. Everything comes from endorsement. So you darn right they're gonna get that kid that scholarship. That $32,000, that $60,000 is peanuts compared to the millions of dollars in the rights that ABC, NBC, CBS, ESPN, you name it, college football, they have college football stations just for that, basketball stations just for that. So, that's money. Money still is the basis of why this is going to move on in a certain fashion.
Yeah, I guess you're right. All right.
And you have to pay the salaries of the professors and all the paraprofessionals and everyone that's on these campuses. So we get it. At the end of the day, though, parents have to use wisdom in how you maneuver. Because if we're talking about college and university, we the fact that we're dealing with local schools just in New York, trying to figure out what's going on and what kind of hybrid learning. So these are things to keep abreast of when we talk about where the legal meets the cultural, knowing your rights as well. And some schools are giving kids the option of whether or not they come in or they do distance learning. So some private schools are giving that option. So it's a lot to just be aware of and be conscious of and be active in the conversation and helping to keep your kids safe. I think Tamika said it takes one person to spread COVID. That's so true. And we can't get comfortable in the states where the numbers are going down that we're in the clear, because we haven't hit the fall yet. We don't know what the fall is going to look like. And everybody is warning about this second wave mixed with the flu and all the other challenges that come. But we can talk about this for the entire show. I know there's some hot topics that we want to follow up on. And Ed, you are doing some additional research to bring back to our viewers.
Yeah, what I wanted to talk to the viewers about were these 2 very interesting cases coming out of the South, starting with the Mississippi Supreme Court. Back in January of this year, the court decided a case regarding the 12-year sentence of an African-American man named Willie Nash. Now, what's interesting here is that Willie Nash, 39 years old, was booked into the Newton County Jail on a misdemeanor charge, right? And at some point, he ended up still possessing his cell phone and in custody. So he asked one of the sheriff's deputies if he could charge his phone. And the deputy is like, phone? You got a phone? And, after that, needless to say, he was eventually convicted of possessing a cell phone in a correctional facility. And the judge sentenced him to 12 years. Now, I think most of us agree that inmates maybe shouldn't possess a cell phone within a correctional institution, but for somebody to get 12 years for that, especially when there's some evidence of the individual not knowing whether it was wrong or not, and possibly some malfeasance or a failure to follow procedures by the law enforcement officers, this is extremely harsh. And keep in mind that the judge that was sentencing him told him at the time that you're lucky we aren't charging you as a habitual offender. Now, we can talk about what a habitual offender is maybe in a little bit, because it also applies more strongly to the other case I'm going to talk about. But needless to say, Mr. Nash filed for a motion. He put in a motion for a new trial. The court denied that. The grounds for that was he also appealed his sentence on 8th Amendment grounds, cruel and unusual, saying that the sentence was grossly disproportionate to the crime he was convicted of. 12 years, cell phone, it doesn't weigh out, And also during his trial, the officer that basically was in charge of his intake never testified as to whether the booking procedures were followed. Now,
whose fault is that, Ed?
Right.
We're talking about a breakdown in the criminal justice system by way of the sentence, right? And so we can nibble this all the way up till we get to the sentence. So let's just take some human bites till we get to the sentence, right? And you highlighted some of it, right? There's negligence and there's gross negligence on the police department side, right? Unless you're telling me that he purposely hit the phone in his rectum, which, look, let's be graphic. That's how drugs and things get transported in and out of jail. Unless you're telling me that there was a total breakdown of the mission and safety and protocols within any police department. You and I know, even Dr. Grant know, everybody knows that the moment that the police stop you, put handcuffs on you, decide they're going to transport you, you're going to get searched. The moment that you get to the sheriff's department, the precinct, wherever they're taking you to, whether it's transit, you name it, state troopers, you're going to get searched one more time. You know that your shoelaces is going to be taken from you. Anything that you could cause harm to yourself, hanging yourself, eating something, swallowing something that can leave the police department or the sheriff's department in some type of vulnerable and liability as far as them being in custody of you and that leading to some type of harm or some type of death. So they're going to make sure that your belt is going to be taken, right? So you're going to have periods, moments where they're going to check to see if you have any contraband. And by the way this sounds, it sounds like one of those type of cases where you get stopped for one thing, and next thing you know, you're doing strip search and you're coughing and your clothes are all off. But at the end of the day, we know all that failed, right? Once again, unless he had it in his rectum, everything else failed, right? Because they should have been able to determine that, period. Whether he was being transported from another facility or whether he was arrested from the street, those protocols are in place. And then we add horror to horrible is that his defense counsel, whether he went pro se or not, his defense counsel, they fell asleep at the wheel in that they did not call the initial arresting officer, whoever was in charge of the transportation and checking off to make sure the protocols, the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. I mean, this is a 100% set up the Southern way. I mean, like, I can't see it any other way. And I know he's fighting and he used the 8th Amendment as a cause of action, which is cruel and unusual punishment handed down by the court in reference to his sentence. But how do we even get there just with those little nibbles and bites? That's ineffective assistance of counsel just based upon that alone.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the part of whether he actually hit it or not, because the court noted in its opinion, this is what's been reported, that because there were separate opinions by the presiding justices, 2 of the presiding justices and 1 of the associate justices, even though, they agreed at the end to uphold the sentence, criticizing the harshness of the sentence, especially in light of the fact that he apparently, or he seemed to convey a misunderstanding of whether or not the having or the possessing of that cell phone was illegal in the first place, which goes to your point that, unless he hit it in his rectum, which I doubt he did, because he actually went to the deputy and said, "Hey, could you charge this for me?" Like it
was a Sunday, right?
Yeah, somebody was hiding it, they wouldn't have come to the deputy. It would have been surreptitiously or otherwise discovered, maybe in a search of the cell or in a subsequent search. He apparently volunteered that he had this cell phone. They mentioned that later on, once he realized he wasn't supposed to have it, he tried to deny it, but that's neither here nor there, in my opinion. But you're right. I think this probably deserves a closer examination of the trial record to even see, and then the decision both at that stage and at the lower courts to see if that was raised at all in terms of the ineffective assistance, because definitely this is something that officer should have been subpoenaed and called to the trial to testify regarding the procedures. I don't know if that was a strategic decision or not.
Now, was it sentence flat? Was it a determined sentence of 12 years flat?
12 years for apparently it's a felony, and you can get 12 years on the max side for that possession. Because the problem was, and the court mentioned this, the statute that deals with the possession of the cell phone also mentions the possession of a weapon and other more egregious circumstances. And he actually argued, or he was trying to get the court to say, listen, the sentence is disproportionate because the possession of the cell is not on the same level as, say, possession of a weapon, and that the authors of the law, the legislature, did not intend for the possession of a cell phone for you to get that maximum sentence for that it required a gradation or a setting of some levels as to the sentence, meaning that he should have gotten the low end of the sentencing options under that statute, but the court did not agree with that reading of the statute.
You know, it's interesting to have an understanding of that statute, because unless that statute is strict liability flat out, like no indeterminate, and what I mean indeterminate, that means that you get a period of time like 2 to 12 years, and the judge can fix a range in between and say, all right, you're going to do 2 to 4, or you're going to do 2 to 5, the max being 12, the minimum being 2. For there to be a statute that says, that strictly reads, conservatively reads, that if you're found guilty of this crime, you have to serve a flat 12 years, no ifs, ands, and buts about it. That seems along the line of an 8th Amendment violation, because as you said, cell phone, knife, gun, 3 different degrees should warrant 3 different results. But there was another case that you also was talking about last week, which will get us to something that is really on my heart and mind.
Well, that case is coming out of the Louisiana Supreme Court about 20 years ago, I believe in 1997, in Shreveport, Louisiana. A gentleman by the name of, listen to this, Fair Wayne Bryant, was stopped for the possession of some stolen hedge clippers. They said that his car looked like the car that was reportedly leaving the scene of a burglary. And when they found the hedge clippers, at first he was saying, no, those belong to my wife. I believe he was driving a van. And then he eventually confessed to having, taken or attempt to, take these clippers. And the Louisiana Supreme Court.
Somebody famous? Is that the deal that's so noteworthy about these damn clippers? I mean, was it like, James Brown's clippers that was left on the lawn that he confiscated from some type of, because, I know where you're going with it, because it don't look like good news for Mr. Fair at the end of the day. So, I mean, these clippers were just regular clippers from someone's house or someplace, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the big problem here is that Mr. Bryant was deemed a habitual offender under the habitual offender law in Louisiana, which is extremely harsh. Under that law, you can actually get a sentence of life in prison without possibility of parole. And so what happened with him was that he had several previous offenses on his record. Only one of them violent, quite frankly. He had been convicted of an attempted armed robbery. He had possession of stolen goods, forgery, and burglary, all felonies, but only the attempted robbery was violent. But because of that, he was charged as a habitual offender, and he received this very harsh sentence. The court denied his request for a review of his life sentence. But it was 6 of the 7 judges. It wasn't justices. It wasn't unanimous. The sole dissenter was the only Black member of the court, Burnett Johnson, who also happens to be the Chief Justice. And she basically commented that the habitual offender law was a modern manifestation of the pig law, meaning these were laws that were enacted after the black codes were used to incarcerate black men in the South for relatively minor offenses. And there was also a note that almost 80% of the habitual offenders in the prison system down there are black. Mr. Bryan has been in jail for already 23 years. He's 62 years old. The judge noted that the taxpayers have already spent about $1 million to punish him for taking, some hedge clippers. And, he's serving his time at the Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, which is the largest maximum security prison in the country and the former site of a slave plantation. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, in terms of injustice. He argued that his sentence was unconstitutionally excessive, but the lower court, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals for the state of Louisiana, upheld the sentence, and it was also upheld at the Supreme Court level. So, and like I said earlier, life sentence without parole. This was when I read this, I said, wow, this is amazing, without parole, habitual offender laws, we could talk about each one, but I believe today you wanted to talk about parole.
Yeah, I mean, we've always had issues with Louisiana and how they conduct their business, right? We always know that, right? And so this is just another example of black folks getting the short end of the stick in a state that maybe we need to revisit whether or not we want to put our fork in the ground and stay there. And Dr. Grant, if you go up to the top of that article, I'm sorry, it looks like you just that article, and you can go to the top of it. I think there's something that's important there that leads us to, what we're really trying to illustrate today. And we can talk more about it in our next segment. Keep on going all the way to the top. It's the title that is of interest, right? So it says, Fairwayne Bryant, man sentenced to life in prison for attempting to steal hedge clippers. Not stolen, but attempting to steal hedge clippers in 1997, granted new parole hearing. So what's the good news is that he's granted a new parole hearing. What we want to discuss today, in conjunction with what we discussed already in reference to these two other cases that are egregious in nature, is what is parole? Where did that come from? And a lot of people in our community get parole and probation confused. They are two different things. Some states don't even have probation anymore, or they don't have parole. They have what they call post-release, which is a phenomenon or a mixing of the two. And so I want to spend some time today. Let's spend some time, going through and taking a deep dive on what parole is. So once again, parole and probation is different. They're two distinct definitions, and post-release is another distinct definition. So let's deal with parole. Parole is basically when there is a board that makes a determination based upon the crime that you committed, how much time that you have served, that they want to cut your term of incarceration short. So let's say you're doing 6 years and you've been incarcerated, the minimum of it is 2. You've been incarcerated 2.5 years. You might be eligible to have your case and have your sentence and have you go before a parole board and have that parole board make decisions that may ultimately lead you to being released, lead you to what they call an open date. And we'll define that as we go on. So that's what parole is. Parole is allowing you to leave jail early. That is cutting your sentence short so you can go back in the community where you will be supervised by a parole officer. All right. And that officer is supposed to help you become part of the mainstream of the community. Now, parole was established as early as the 1800s. Can you imagine that? As early as the 1800s. I was thinking 1980 to be right. I mean, but 1800? early 1800s, you're telling me that somebody had in their wherewithal to have this thing called parole exist and put it into play? And the mission back then, which is the mission now, is to shorten prison terms, one, and to allow rehabilitation in the community. Now, my first reaction to that is that if you want to shorten prison terms, then just shorten it. You don't need another entity. Just make it so long, right? And I understand the need for rehabilitation or watch over or overseer for rehabilitation in the community. But when you look at our culture and you look at incarceration, we know incarceration, based upon our culturalism and our experience in America, is just all about free labor. You know what I mean? It was all about free labor, another form of slavery, another way of saying we're going to build this country off of your back. But nonetheless, parole existed, and it existed for those reasons. And we also have to understand that part of the rationale back in the 1800s was that criminals were sick. They were sick people. You know, they were people that needed caring for, and they needed rehabilitation because who would steal, who would commit a crime, and they needed to be cured before they could be brought back in the community. And so when you had this parole, the question then becomes, once you release the individual out in the community, who's going to look after that person? Who's going to help that person get back on their feet? Who's going to decide whether that person is being a parasite on society once again, or helping build the mainstream of society? So that's the history of it from a historical perspective. Now, when we take a deep dive as far as New York is concerned, it wasn't until around about the 1930s that the parole system in New York started to kind of get its legs underneath it. And it went back and forth, like who was going to be spearheading it, whether it was going to be the Department of Corrections, whether it was going to be a separate institution, whether it was going to be a combination. And this went on back and forth, back and forth. Who is going to preside over this? Is it going to be tied to corrections, or is it going to be an independent agency? And what we have learned that over the years, there's basically three sources for which parole has developed, and you can look to. So I want our listeners to really understand. There's three sources that you can look to kind of understand this phenomenon of parole. Because Ed, as you know, as an attorney, there are attorneys that just practice in the area of parole violations. That's all they do, and practice in making sure that you get parole. That's all they do. And parole in New York State has one of the largest in the country, and they get paid the highest in the country. So that just tells you that it is an area for opportunity for us to look at culturally, because you know that we have been precluded from these areas before, right? And so when we're looking at career paths, why not that career path? Why not look at probation, since the money is right and you're doing an overall good? So for our listeners, once again, you need to look at New York State statutes. Become a reader of that. Just know what's going on statute-wise. New York State rules and regulations and codes and judicial decisions, as Ed was talking about and going over a judicial decision. You know, what is happening in the courts? Look at state statutes that are being passed by the state legislator, and the governor, our governor Cuomo, is ruling on it. And you can look to, and let me say the name right and give you the spelling, is McKinney's, McKinney. Let me spell it again, McKinney's, MKinney''S, Consolidation Laws of New York, Correctional Law, and New York Penal Law. That'll give you some of the history and some understanding of parole, but it is a very, very, very detailed read. And so hopefully today I'll be able to go through some of the stuff there.
Can I just mention something?
Yeah, brother, jump on in.
Yeah, I think this also speaks culturally to the larger issue of those of us who have a loved one who's incarcerated. It's important that you provide that person with as much support as you can while they're in there, because to my understanding, a lot of the arguments that take place at these parole hearings are what exactly has the person been doing to better themselves while they're in there. You know, you have a number of inmates who end up pursuing their education while they're in custody, getting degrees, pursuing trades, you know, and a lot of that plays a role because the parole board has to make a decision whether or not this person is otherwise what they call rehabilitated and so forth, whether they're going to be a productive member of society if they're allowed to be released and reintegrate. So, you know, when inmates and people who are in, you know, are getting that support from the outside, and also they also want to know where will you be staying?
Your support mechanism.
Yeah, are you going to have a job waiting for you? You know, what's going to be happening with you? I recently had to help out a friend of mine who was writing some letters and providing some support for a relative who the board was considering release for. And so, you know, it's a process that requires some level of support from family members, relatives, and friends.
I'll make the analogy. This is the analogy I'll say to everyone. I say when it comes down to criminal proceedings from beginning to end, especially when we're doing bail applications, that is an application that's made to the court. Definition, write it down. Application that is made to the court that will determine whether or not you're released and you're able to go home while your case is being litigated in court. And there you go. There's McKinney, Consolidated Laws of New York. You know, for $112 or $152, you can get some of that information there, or you can just punch it in and look it up on the computer and get as much as you can. But I'll make this analogy. It's like being a patient in the hospital. You need your visitors. Visitors will determine whether or not, unfortunately, this is my viewpoint, whether or not the doctors pay attention to you, whether or not your complaints are being heard, whether or not you're getting proper treatment. And the same goes to when you're incarcerated. You need someone checking in. You need someone coming to visit you. You need to hold your head up high despite the circumstances that you're in, so that when you're in front of a parole board, you maybe get that opportunity, because parole boards don't come every day. You know, once you're denied, and I'll talk a little bit about that, once you're denied, you can't go back next week. So what's important, and one of the things I want to highlight when we talk about cultural and the legal meeting, is that the parole board consists of 12 to 16 members. And as I said, highest paid, right? Largest in the state. Now, these 12 or 16 members are, guess what? Appointed by the governor. Not elected, but appointed by the governor. And that's important because we all know that I haven't seen a post out there anywhere in the chief. For those who look at union papers out there in New York City, you know, my 5 boroughs, you know, I ain't seen nothing in the Union. I ain't seen nothing in the Amsterdam News. These are all for those that are watching us out of state. These are all papers where you see most of the government, civil servant type of listings or job opportunities in those papers. I haven't seen anything that says, do you want to become a parole board member, right? So if it's not listed and you don't know about it and you can't apply for it, that means politics and power is playing once again, because somebody is getting appointed to that position. And would you know that there is a sister who is the chairperson of the board? Her name is Tina N. Stanford, Stanford. She's an attorney. And she's been the chairperson for the parole board since 2013. Now, not only are you appointed, but you get a 6-year term. Now, let me act like I'm my father, right? God bless him, he's passed, right? My father's always said, you need to get yourself a pension. You need to get yourself a pension. That's what you need to do, boy. Go work for the post office. Forget all this lawyer shenanigans. Go and go get yourself a pension. Then when I became a lawyer, and this is the advice I should have took. When I became a lawyer, he was like, well, now that you become a lawyer, why don't you become a lawyer for the post office? Right? So now I've been for 23 years. You know what type of pension I would have had in the post office? Being a lawyer, right? And when's the last time you seen the Daily News that the attorneys for the post office are getting fired? How about you, Dr. You don't see that, right? The economy doesn't affect them. They go on and on. They have attorneys too that have to deal with workers' compensation. They have to deal with all type of worker severance packages, violations, you name it. But I say all this to say that it's a 6-year term. You do that twice, you got a 10-year pension. You get appointed twice, you in for 10 years. So that's why it's important, because if you get appointed, guess what? There's no need to not appoint you again, especially if I'm governor and you my cousin Ed or a contributor down the road that I've given you that position. Then what's the need for me to take that position from you? Nobody knows about it. Nobody's running against you for it. So now you got this position, and if you do it twice over, you got 12 years in the state. You do it 3 years, you do it 3 terms, you got 18 years in the state. That's almost a 20-year pension. And this is where I'm talking about the cultural and the legal meeting. This is what we're talking about when we talk about job opportunities.
Hold on. Mr. Russell, we got to slow it down a minute because I don't want anybody to miss this. We've been talking about the importance of local elections, the importance of knowing who's representing you on every level of government. If this isn't a phenomenal example of why it's important to know who you're electing on city council, who you're electing New York State Assembly, who you're electing to governor, who you're electing to mayor, because they have the capacity and the ability to appoint positions that most people in our community don't even know are appointed positions. And like I said, they're getting a pension after 2 appointments. They're set, their family's set. They're independently wealthy people just in the state of New York, not doing any brain surgeon work per se, air quotes, because everybody's job is important. So don't come for me. All I'm saying is, if you don't know what you don't know, then you don't know. And our kids have all sorts of opportunities that they're not aware of, that they can make a lucrative living, they can contribute to society and add value. But who knows this information? That's why this show is so important, for us to break down and help you to become knowledgeable about what we're dealing with just on a local level. So it might not be the same in Louisiana as it is in New York, but everybody has local elected positions, appointed positions, and the elected positions that people pay attention to. I hope you're picking up what Mr. Russell is putting down today.
Yeah, I mean, from what
let me just hold the point right there, because Dr. Grant said something, and I want you to chime in on this, so you can have the floor on this, right? So remember, I told you about different entities owning who was going to be in charge. So in 2011, the New York State Department of Corrections and the New York State Division of Parole merged to form a new organization called the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, DOCCS. So it's the New York State Department of Correction and Community Supervision. I've been practicing for 23 years. I've never heard that, Ed. I've never heard it before. I don't know. I never just had it. Now it's an independent agency that makes decisions and has the authority based upon Article 12B of the executive law. We can go into all that, but it's an agency that makes all the decisions as far as parole is concerned. Now, Dr. Grant, you had said something about, what their responsibilities and duties are, what the requirements are, and we should be mindful. Guess what? Here's a coconut that I'll throw at you. Guess what? To be a board member, I'll read it. There is no stated education or work-related requirement.
Say what?
There is no education or work-related requirement to becoming a parole board member outside of the practical background of understanding correction, the practical background. Look, so I'm not making it up. The only real requirement, guess what the real requirement is? Guess what the real requirement is? Anyone? Once, twice, 3 times, sold, I got it. The real requirement is that you can't have any other job. The only other job that you can have is teaching at a state university. That's it. Now wait. Now let's put a plug in it. That's to become a board member, parole board member. Now let's drop it down. Parole has what they call field parole officers and what they have institutional parole officers. Field parole officers is what we see on shows like Friday or Boys in the Hood come kicking down the door, want to know what's in your apartment, want to make sure that you live in a clean life, want to make sure that you're not on drugs. Institutional parole officer is the person that deals with pre-parole interviews, making a parole recommendation, drafting your parole summary, doing all the stuff that while you're incarcerated, getting you to the moment where you go before a parole board and making a decision. Hold on, here it is. Here's the big splash. To become either of those two positions, you have to be 21 to 40 years of age. You have to have a JD or a bachelor's plus a combination of grad school or social work experience. You have to pass a civil servant examination in sociology and criminology. You have to be proficient in how to use a firearm. You have to be physically, mentally, and morally fit, whatever that means. And you have to take 1 month of training. So that's what you need to become an officer. But to become a board member that's appointed, check it out. A board member that's appointed, underlined, bold, in quotes, you don't need any of that. But to get the regular old job that folks in our community might be fighting for to become, you need degrees, you need to pass a course, you need to be physically, mentally fit, you need to make sure you get sociology and criminology is up to date, you got to make sure you get that bachelor's, you can't be over 40 years of age. Well, goddamn, Shimmy Sham, what's going on?
I think to plays I think the idea to play devil's advocate kind of, because I agree there should be some requirements there, but I think what was happening with respect to the folks who made these changes and decided the requirements were in that whole field. I think there are a lot of individuals involved in that field that might not necessarily have much of an education, but they are very much aware because of their experience on what programming services are available to those once they get out and into the community. I know when I was with the Brooklyn DA's office, there was an office within the DA's office that dealt with servicing those who had just gotten out of prison, like, helping them find housing, helping them find jobs, helping them get, other services. And a lot of these people that were involved in this work were more kind of folks who were maybe social workers, or maybe not even social workers, but just some people that were formerly incarcerated who were very aware of the challenges and decided to, invest their life into making sure that others that get out don't have as hard a time as they did when they got out. So I'm thinking that's possible.
I don't know. I can't fight that. Yeah, look. Just because the apple and the onion is red, it tastes a whole lot different. You understand what I'm saying? They taste a whole lot different. And what you're saying is that, there is room for those that don't have academia to be board members. I'm with you. You hold 3 spots for that. You hold 4 spots for that. Maybe you hold 5 spots for that. We're going to find folks that are entrenched in some way, community-based. I'm not saying you have to go to college. I'm not saying you have to do any of those things. What I am making, the point I'm making is that you're talking about a position that the governor can appoint for which you have no academic requirement that we have to hold that person to, which means leaves the door to colonialism, leaves the doors to nepotism, leaves the door to a lot of things, because the people that I know that's in charge of legal aid, the people that I know that's in charge of the youth organization, the Boys Club or whatever, they're not getting a call either. They're not calling up and saying, hey, look, let's appoint you. And, I'm just going to throw out fiction. I did some fact search, right? I looked at the people that are on the board. I looked at some of those names. I didn't see one Pichardo. I didn't see one Johnson or Smith or Russell.
Those positions, my understanding, those positions are extremely political. I think from my experience is what they do is they will ask certain elected officials, head of the assembly, head of the Senate, to see if they have names to submit or individuals that they believe are qualified. Sometimes whoever is head of the chair of criminal justice, either on the assembly or Senate side, to see if they have candidates. And then ultimately, the governor makes a decision after a background check is done. I mean, I'm not sure we're ever going to get away from those positions being politicized.
Well, look, I just want to make sure. I'm sorry, Doug Grant. I just want to make sure that we call a spade, so we're not dancing around something, because we know that there are influential and powerful people in our community. However you define community, however you go up the social economic ladder, and those folks are not getting the call. Now, I have nothing against Tina Stratford, but her whole practice was in Erie County, Buffalo, Rensselaer. Now, I got nothing against Buffalo and Rensselaer, but it's not the multifaceted complexity that I'm looking for.
Well, there are Black communities up there.
Wait. I'm not saying it's not Black communities, because I don't care if it's Black or not. What I'm saying is that if you're in this position and you're appointed to this position, and I'm not discrediting her credentials, I'm just saying you might look in places where things are moving fast, decisions are happening quickly. There's some multitude and adversities that are going on. It's not necessarily isolated. When I look at all those names, I'm sure she deserved the spot. Kudos to her. I'm 100% for her. When I look at those other names and I look at those other credentials, I'm telling you, it looks like, as you said, we're going to go down to the state, we're going to go down to the Senate, we're going to say, hey, man, you got somebody who's that, Ed, Phil, whatever, come on over. Let's kind of do that thing.
Well, I think for the short term, I think in speaking to Dr. Grant's statement earlier, I think here where the room is for the community movement is to press our current elected officials or our elected officials, period, to have them then talk to the governor. Because listen, the governor needs them as much as they need him. And there's some trading that takes place with respect to certain laws getting passed, the budget getting passed. So they can, say to the governor, hey, governor, would you consider this person for that spot? They're very well qualified. The community supports them. What's up? And at some point, there has to be a response there. So that's where the buttons are to put some pressure. We're not without any avenues of advocacy here in this area. It's just that it's at a higher level for you to have your local elected official and say, hey, listen, what's going on with this? Can you look into this and talk to somebody at the governor's office?
You can't advocate what you don't know about. That's the other part. You can't advocate what you don't know about.
You took it words right out of my mouth, Mr. Russell. That's it. That's why this show is so important, because how is the legal going to meet the cultural if you don't even know it's an appointed position? Hello, people.
Now, Ed, don't get me arrested because I took it from out of her mouth. All of a sudden, I'm doing 12 years straight up because I took verbiage from her mouth and I said it. You know what I mean?
I think that's a civil suit, Mr. Russell.
You know what I mean? So
look, we're at the top of the show, top of the hour. I mean, this was a great show. This is a show that children need to watch. Share this on your page. They're doing a lot during the summer. We hope they have an opportunity to have some safe social distance fun for whatever vacations people can have. We pray they get a chance to unwind. Some people are going back to school. It's August in certain states, but in New York, they haven't yet. This is a learning opportunity, because I guarantee you there are adults who didn't know. I learned some new things about parole today. And everybody knows somebody who might have a bid, who might be in need of understanding how parole works, who needs to just learn this information so that we can be better equipped on how to advocate to our elected officials. To your point, Mr. Ricardo, how do we go and say, look, these positions are appointed. What are we saying to the governor? Who's representing our community? We're the Black and brown faces. That's what Speaking Legally is about, where the legal meets the cultural, where we can have conversations around current events, as well as educate you on information that you should know. So you're not just a sidewalk attorney. You know how I feel about that. We all want to litigate all the cases you see on the media. Here are two professional attorneys who do this day in and day out. In criminal law, in civil law, in immigration, you don't have to guess. You don't have to make it up. You don't have to fly with what we call, these myths, urban myths that come through our community that are not true. Talk to the professionals. Call someone, have their number on speed dial, read something before you need something. And Mr. Russell would say with cardiac arrest, they're here to serve. This is a part of their give back during this new COVID reality that we're living in. We launched this show to be an information portal to really help our culture understand how to deal and navigate and litigate if necessary, if you have had some injustices served to you. So both of you, I'm going to invite you to say your au revoirs as we wrap up today's show. This was a great show. I think I'm gonna go press replay real quick and watch this one again. But anything you want to share before we wrap up for today?
No, not at all. I just would like to say buenas tardes. Ed Pichardo, signing out, 718-514-9099. Hablamos español.
I just want to say Royce Russell, I can reach at 718-785-8890. I want us also to hold each other accountable that next week, I just want to lead off with the end of how do you go about applying for parole? I mean, the information that folks need to know. Can my cousin apply for it now? What happens when your decision is denied? Is there another form of relief? I think that's critical too, because I believe our listeners and viewers will definitely want to know that. So let's hold each other to that so we can finish up this segment. All right?
Absolutely. Well, thank you again, everyone, for being here. Be back same time, same place next week.